up on YouTube within a couple of days. We'll be sending the link to everybody who registered, so you don't need to scribe away. You can sit back and enjoy presentation, and if you want to look over some parts of it, you can do that on YouTube at your leisure. Okay, I think we'll give people just a couple more minutes and then we'll get going, because I know one of our speakers has another speaking engagement. So.
That would be rude, Jake. That would be rude. I'm about to go to the vision. Give you guys room. You don't have to.
Oh, I see Bernadette there. Bernadette was one of the people who was registered for in-person for this talk. We will get back to in-person talks pretty soon, but unfortunately we had to make this one 100% Zoom. Okay, guys, I think we'll probably still have some more people coming in, but let's get going. My name's Hazel England. I'm the Director of Outreach and Education at the Great Swamp Watershed Association, and we also have Sandra Levine, who is the Director of Water Quality, who is letting you in and moderating the chat for us tonight. But we're really excited to have our speakers tonight, because last fall we worked very closely with them for 9 weeks on the large restoration that was conducted at the conservation management area that Great Swamp Watershed Association owns. And so we know these guys work firsthand, and we thought it would be great to have them come and talk, especially after the plant sale, where we're focusing on plants for native pollinators, to have them come and just talk about that whole process. So we have 3 presenters tonight. Michael Devos is the Installation Director at Indigenous Ingenuities, an ecological landscape design build company in Doylestown, PA, and an instructor at the Barnes Foundation Horticultural Certificate Program. He's a graduate of Delaware Valley University, and his career includes creating community gardens at the Greater Newark Conservancy and restoration work on the preserve's own Founders Point Pond. He currently lives in Hunterdon County. We have Carl Moulter, who's a design director at the same firm and host of local FM station WDVR's Into the Garden radio show. He's the son of a North Jersey landscape painter and gardener mother. Carl grew up in an environment where art met the garden. He graduated from Rutgers with a degree in landscape architecture and has been designing area landscapes for more than 30 years. When he's not designing, he spends time managing his sylvan acre and tending to his garden radio show. And finally, Lauren Johnson is the maintenance manager at Indigenous Ingenuities and a regular columnist for Edible Jersey magazine. Her hobby gardening experience includes maximizing her mostly shady yard with a cornucopia of native plants, including Sedum ternatum, Pacra aurea, and fringe trees, along with a hearty dose of Tiarella. She has a wide range of professional gardening experience, ranging from organic vegetable farming to estate maintenance, as well as nursery sales and marketing. When not enjoying the outdoors, she can be found in her studio conjuring up comedic illustrations. So welcome, guys, and we're going to turn over to Carl and Michael.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I am Carl Moulter. Again, I'm the design director at Indigenous Ingenuities. The first slide is the company logo, and our creed is we design, install, and maintain habitats that strengthen the connection between people and the environment. This talk is the evolution of a garden habitat, and the 3 components of that are design, installation, and management. And we believe that transformation of the landscape is a combination of design plus the install plus ongoing maintenance. Gardening is evolving from a purely aesthetic pursuit to an ecological one. There are warning signs worldwide, from the effects of global climate change to crashing populations of species essential to the very food web we all depend on. As a design-build firm, we seek to bring a new ecological sensibility and urgency to what we do and to our clients and the community, letting us all collectively become the foot soldiers of a movement that has the potential to help save us from ourselves. We'll start out with the first part of the process begins on paper. This is the design portion. The bedrock discipline of the design studio at Indigenous is the discipline of landscape architecture. You go to the website for the American Society of Landscape Architects, you will see the description is as follows. Landscape architecture involves the planning, design, management, and nurturing of the built and natural environments. With their unique skill set, landscape architects work to improve human and environmental health in all communities. They plan and design parks, campuses, streetscapes, trails, plazas, residences, and other projects that strengthen communities. Many homeowners who reach out to us begin with asking, they need us to solve one or two specific problems. In the course of the conversation that we have, we realize these problems are often linked to a larger picture that the homeowners do not realize is there. None of the elements in our landscapes exist in a vacuum. All parts, whether they be water flow or soil problems or a hardscape does not function well, happen to all affect each other. And changing one of these invariably affects the other parts of the property. Also, most townships now require homeowners to deal with stormwater management on their property when they seek to make new changes such as new patios or walks. As designers, we are trained to look at all the elements of these problems that a clients bring to be solved and how they can affect other things on the property that the homeowner would not even realize. A well thought out design will not only solve the homeowner's immediate needs, but it become a vital blueprint to help guide them in the proper sequencing and phasing of work on their property. Combining the all-encompassing quality of a design master plan with an ecological sensibility, and you have a powerful tool in helping transform a property become not only more functional, but more sustainable in the long run. The process begins with assembling site information to create what we would call a base plan, and it needs to be to a scale. In this slide, we have a professionally prepared survey that a homeowner for this project that we'll be studying in this talk has given us. Satellite views, such as the ones on Google Earth, are also very helpful. It gives us a lot of information that often isn't on the survey, such as vegetation and bed lines. And it's just a really nice eagle's eye view of the context of the site, and that is what's off the survey, neighboring properties. Nothing beats then a field visit where we actually go out and hand measure the area that will need to be designed. And in this case, you see we have a combination of the house architecturals plus my hand notes of going and measuring things and then marking where things are on this property. Here's another site plan for a residence in New Hope where I've gone right on the engineer's plan and filled in things like existing vegetation and just stuff that's not on the engineer's plan to get a good picture of what's going on, a snapshot of the property, as it were. We take that and we produce this rather dry looking plan we call a base plan, which will have vegetation, property lines, the house, etc. From that, we then start doing our research and putting the pieces together. And this is what we call just a step up from a bubble concept diagram of the property. In this case, I've done it right over a Google Earth view of the property. What I do is I start taking various layers of information that we can get either online in the form of topographic maps, or again, if they have supplied that information to us, to come up with how is the water flowing over the site? What are the wind directions predominantly in the winter and summer? Soils information, that's another thing we can get online. And we start layering all these things on the plan to help guide design. The owner gives us what we call its program, and that's the client's wish list. What they would like to get out of the project, or the problems that need to be solved, usually both. And what we do then as designers, we take all these functions that are either existing or would like to be proposed, and we put them into a rough diagram. And that's where we bring ecological practice into the picture, from how we handle the site stormwater, and when we start picking plants, mostly native species, and specifying reusable natural hardscape materials, and just basic tenets of landscape architecture where we're working with the site rather than against it. Next slide is we produce a concept plan to show the client. And this is usually something that's highly illustrative, easy to read, and presents the concept to the homeowner. This is the next phase up where we actually bring that plan into what we call CAD. That's the acronym for computer aided design or drafting. I forget which one it is. And this is a very tight plan. And this is what we use to start producing schedules, which are the plant lists, that has the plant names, plant names, sizes, and quantities. This is what we would call a bid ready plan. Also an install. We can hand this to an installation crew to begin installation. Sometimes a plan isn't enough to convey a design idea. So we will jump to these three-dimensional studies. This is an isometric study for a wall fountain on this property to convey the design intent. Sometimes, again, this is that same fountain, we'll use actual photographs, just quick and dirty sketches to convey the design intent. And sometimes we'll go and use a application such as Photoshop just to quickly throw something together to convey the design intent to a client. This is for a deck extension for a residence in New Hope. And this is a quick study for a little arbor gate and a stone wall for the property we're looking at. Again, all done in various programs. Sometimes we will need to do more of a broad brush plan for a property, and it's what we call a property management plan. This is where someone who has a lot of land is looking not only to have various components installed around the house, they need to know what to do with the overall property. And for these plans, we like to separate areas into zones, each zone having its own maintenance strategy and goals. And typically around the house is where we leave to conventional landscape practices of beds and mulching. And outward, we go into more naturalistic schemes of just meadow and lawn paths and the management of the vegetation, usually prevention, suppression of invasives, which unfortunately seems to be the bulk of what we do in the natural landscape these days. But the flip side is for certain plans, we need to get very specific as far as the control of stormwater and approval for construction as far as the pollution and control of the soil on the site. This is a plan we submitted to the Bucks County Conservation Corps for their approval for a pool house, swimming pool, and a lot of other stuff in this backyard in Doylestown Borough. And this will more like a standard engineer's plan set with details and schedules for all sorts of things. Now we're jumping to, I think, a plan most people can relate to. This is a single family house for a property in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Had a very conventional landscape, paver front walk, very typical front lawn. And typical plantings you would see with such a development house, probably dating from the 70s or 80s. This is where we go in and start what we call retooling the landscape, taking out a lot of the non-native plants, especially the ones that are on the invasive list, because things like barberry pretty much appear on any landscape these days. We will go in and remove all that stuff. We're very lucky. We had a homeowner in this case that was not so interested in having a front lawn, so we did replace a good chunk of the front lawn with what we call a no-mow fescue lawn, something that can be mown at the most, two, maybe 3 times a year if they really want it managed, but actually don't need to mow it at all. But we were lucky with this homeowner, and this is a job that was done in the spring of last year, and this is me photographing it in the fall. So this is after a season of growth, and you can see it's very much not the typical American suburban landscape. We see under the red maple, we have planted in the sedge or seersucker sedge, and behind that we have plantings of various native grasses. This is coming up. We have left the existing paver walk, and you can see we're masses of where we plant in. We call these things plugs. Some of you may be familiar with the term, some maybe not, but the plants that go in very small but close together, so they rapidly establish as colonies in this matrix. Here's another shot of a season's worth of growth over the front. What was the front lawn of this house in Newtown, Pennsylvania? We think there's so much more value to that in these plantings as far as providing plants for pollinators and cover for birds and insects. We believe this is the start of transforming the American landscape. But none of this will happen without the next step, which is really crucial, and that's installation. And I'm going to turn this over to Michael Devos.
Thank you all very much. My name is Michael Devos. I am the landscape designer and the installation coordinator here at Indigenous Ingenuities. And what I'm going to kind of go through here is a little bit of a story about this project. A lot of the plans that Carl just showed you were all of one property, where we've gone through conceptual diagrams and 3-dimensional drawings and different site maps of the project here. And what I'm going to get into is a couple of the different types of installation, some plant material and some stonework. We consider everything we do installation, whether it's stone, whether it's plants, whether it's drainage, creating rain gardens, anything that has to do with putting native plants and natural stones on properties falls into my wheelhouse here. The one piece I want to touch on, it's a little different than most companies and organizations, is here at Indigenous Ingenuities, there are 3 landscape architects on staff. There's 2 designers on staff. There's other garden people that all have input. So in a lot of these projects, as we're going through them, it's not just one person designing these projects. We're sitting down as a team in most cases and kind of going through and throwing plants back and forth with each other, talking about different ideas and different stonework and different concepts for these plans. It might ultimately be one person, whether it's Carl or Ben or myself, drawing up the plan, putting the plan into Vectorworks and doing it, but it really is a collaboration. And from my standpoint, it is kind of what makes us a little different, and it also is what kind of makes us a little special here. I really value the intent of other people, and not everybody's idea is the greatest, so it's really nice to have a couple different people here all pitching in and all having their 2 cents put in. And I really think it finds us in a position that put in well thought out plans and well thought out installations when it comes time to go out there and actually install things here. So you're looking at this project that we're going to go through a lot of. This is a little irregular stone patio that we were installing here over in the corner of the project. So this is the front of the house. This is the main house. I'm going to show you All three sections of what I'm going to talk about are all the same house right here. So we've been working on this property for approximately 4 or 5 years now. We did a full master plan, a large landscape plan for this entire property, and the client has slowly broken the pieces out piece by piece. And we've done, you know, a little small section of this landscape has gone in every year, and there's still 3 or 4 more pieces to go for this project here. But really what I want you to see is the transformation of what took place there and what it looks like now. So the slide you're looking at is obviously a typical front entrance to a lot of properties here. Hedges, stonework that's kind of sloppy looking, not really neat looking, a little narrow in my opinion. But hedges. I call them meatballs, lollipops, and horrible landscapes that we just run into day in, day out here. It's very claustrophobic. You can't walk off that pathway. It's very conforming. It forces you down that walkway, and you just feel really constrained walking into this front yard right here. This was the existing. Here's us, step one, redoing this front walkway here. Some of the things I'm going to touch on, you're going to hear a lot of in this talk, is drainage and clean stone. So when we set new stonework, we don't really use pavers that much, but when we're using natural stone, all the base material underneath this stone is all clean gravel, so it drains. We don't use modified, we don't use sand, we don't use things that are going to bind up and kind of almost act like cement in there. So everything you're looking at there in that picture is clean gravel. We use 3/4 inch clean as a base, get that compacted really tightly, and then we put on 1/2 inch clean material on top of that. So ultimately the joints of this patio drain into what is a giant French drain underneath the patio, and ultimately can just work its way into the garden beds and expand into the garden there, ultimately watering the garden. Obviously in heavy storms it runs off, but in a nice typical rainstorm, a lot of that water infiltrates the walkway, infiltrates in the garden bed and lawn, and is feeding the landscape with water. All of us despise irrigation. I think irrigation is the most useless thing out there when it comes to landscapes. Plants need some babying and some water when they're first put in, but if you're choosing the right plants, you should never, ever, ever need irrigation, especially if you're using native plants. They belong here, they thrive here. It's what is happy in these situations. So here's that front walkway here. One of the other things I'm going to talk about is we made it wider. That's a 5-foot walkway. We kind of kept the formality because this is such a formal front entrance. We use this typical pattern here of 2x2s and 2x3s alternating up the line. So it does give it a very formal look right there. And you can see the clean stone on the edges there, and we're starting to grade up next to it. That's creating that drainage. So as the water gets into those joints, into that patio and walkway there, it's going to filter out through the sides into the new garden beds and into the lawn right there. There's the finished product right there. This is probably a year or 2 after installation. I think this picture was taken early last year, but you can see no hedges. There's no confinement there. You're not boxed in by anything. The kids can run back and forth across this front lawn right there. There's still a nice formal way to walk into the property there with garden beds on either side right there. I believe this is probably early spring, so you can see the alliums are just getting done. Things haven't really punched in and really filled in yet there, but you'll notice in a lot of the slides I show you and later on what Lauren shows you with maintenance is we really like to pack our gardens tight full of plants. When we plant gardens, there's times where I'm ordering 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 plants at a time to install in the gardens. The closer the plants are, the heavier planting there are, the less space there is for weeds. The more we can get your garden full and tight, the less weed competition there's going to be early on in the season. So that was what we would consider the front walk installation right there. That was one of the first projects I worked on years ago here at Indigenous. Now we're looking at what is the side of this property along another road frontage here, but you'll also notice the same hedges. They're maybe different varieties, but they're the same boxes and circles and squares that you see everywhere. Again, very confining, very tight in there. It kind of feels claustrophobic when you're inside those things. Not a good feeling in my mind right there. One of the reasons I really despise these hedges is because they don't ever flower. They're pruned so much, they're so dense. There's no flowers, there's no fall color, there's no interest to these plants right there. It's just a green blob, 12 months of the year, no interest whatsoever. We like to put interest in the garden. Some of the best times I like looking at gardens is in the winter when there's things in that still have stems or have color on it. The bark is showing. there's still grasses that are standing up for the fall. To me, that's some of the best interest in a garden is late fall and winter. Here, what you're looking at is just green blobs. They look the same, 12 months a year, identical look, no change, no nothing, just mulch and green blobs. Here's a little at that side garden right there. We kind of started with a new walkway here. This is kind of a quiet sitting space for coffee in the morning. Roadside there, instead of hedges, we've gone to a fence right there. So that's kind of trying to create some of the separation between the road. That also gives us the ability to grow some vines and some climbing things up that fence. There's native wisteria, there's clematis, there's other things that are climbing on that fence right there. So instead of hedges, now we have a decorative fence that has all different shades of color and vines and textures all over that fence instead of just that green blob. I also want you to notice the patio in this section. There's kind of a design element in that this little patio has a border around it. And this is a thing, you know, in design, we kind of want to follow themes throughout the entire garden. And when you see the next piece of the puzzle here, when we talk about the back patio, you're going to notice that same pattern, that random dimensional flagstone in the center with a formal border around the entire patio right there. Once I get to the back patio and show you some examples there, you'll see the exact same pattern just done on a bigger scale there, but we're keeping that same design intent throughout everything we do in this garden. I would imagine this is probably either this is an early spring picture right when the garden was first cleaned up. And I'm about to show you what it looks like in late summer, early fall. Same garden space, same thing right there. Chock full of plants, mountain mint, agastache, sedums, Amsonia, grasses, vines on the fence, all kinds of interest there, all kinds of shades, textures, colors, everything you can imagine going on there. You remember what that first slide looked like? There were two different green blobs, no interest, no color, no transformation, nothing, to this right here. Again, the same spot right there, looking in, that patio is completely covered. That light you're seeing is on the corner of that patio that we just looked at a little bit ago. And you can imagine sitting in there on a chair, and most of the plants have covered you. You can kind of sit in that little quiet garden right there in the middle of summer and be completely hidden in the garden right there. I think quite a transformation going from a couple different hedgerows of green blobs to this right away. The next piece I'm just going to touch on, and I think Lauren's going to talk a little bit more about this. We do a lot of planting of what we like to happily call hell strips. So a hell strip, in my mind, is that piece of garden between the curb and the sidewalk. We do a lot of work in Doylestown, in the borough there. There's sidewalks throughout all our gardens, and it typically leaves a 3-foot garden, a 3-foot planting space, a 4-foot sidewalk, and then your garden space. Most people typically keep these as lawn, easy to mow, nothing interesting, just a strip of green grass across your front. We like to jam thousands of plants into these things and give it some interest and really make a show walking down the road. Where this house sits, we also work on a couple other projects, all within like a 2-block radius here. And there's 3 or 4 of these that are planted right around this corner here. And it's a showstopper in the summertime. People are walking by, people are noticing the plants, people are enjoying the plants. There's pollinating plants in there. You're looking at mountain mint, sedums, broom sedge, rudbeckia, all kinds of fun stuff in there. Our maintenance crew does a great job of keeping this off the sidewalk there and keeping it trimmed back a little bit. But these strips don't just have to typically be green lawn. They can be attractive and beautiful and fun and attract bugs and butterflies and all those fun pollinators. The last piece of this puzzle I want to talk about is the rear patio. So now you've looked at the front sidewalk of this property. You've looked at the side entrance there and garden where they kind of typically have their morning coffee out there. And now we're getting into the backyard of this project here. And I'm going to go back and talk a lot about drainage and rain gardens and why we do stone kind of differently than most people do. What you're looking at there again are those lovely, lovely hedges everywhere. And if you notice that hedge, it's also taken up about 18 inches of that patio space right there. You're losing square footage of your patio because that green blob was planted too close to the patio. So needless to say, that's gone in the next couple slides. But the biggest problem we found with this patio was the fact that it was wet laid. Wet laid meaning all this stone was set in cement. There's a giant concrete pad, giant concrete slab. All the stones on top of this were all set in cement and all the joints were done with cement. And over the course of a few years, I've been back to this property twice to fix all the joints. Inevitably, all wet laid joints fail. They need to be scraped out, redone every so often. It's kind of a maintenance thing, ongoing. If water is sitting on these patios through the winter, these joints are going to fail. Also, no water is infiltrating in the ground. All the water hitting this patio is just sheeting right off into the lawn and causing throughout this area. So ultimately in our plan, we decided there's going to be 2 rain gardens on either side of this patio. We're going to rip up this entire wet laid patio and reinstall a new patio, dry laid, with clean gravel underneath it that would drain, that would percolate back into the ground. Any excess water would drain into the 2 rain gardens on this property, and we'd be keeping, you know, as much as possible, we keep the water on site and deal with it on site. Here's that same patio. I think this is a winter picture. You can see a little bit of snow on the patio. Same thing, hedges boxed in, feeling claustrophobic, and a wet laid patio that was just a drainage nightmare. Here's us last year. This is last fall. We went in there and started ripping up the stone. A lot of what we do, being ecologically minded here, we're always trying to reuse things. So a handful of these stones got reused in this patio, but we saved all of them. We have them back at our shop. We can use this stone again on another project later on down the road. This can be used somewhere else. We ended up going with a much bigger, thicker, heavier stone in this project, but you can see we palletized up a whole bunch of stone that ultimately is going to get reused at some point down the line. Somewhere that stone will get reused. Some we lost, some had to be broken. We couldn't get them all up nice and neat, but the ones that we were able to salvage, we obviously took care of all of them and brought them back and have them stacked up here at our shop. The next piece of the puzzle, one of the most important things when we're talking about stonework, is pitch and drainage and having the proper elevations here. So here's us out there shooting elevations, making sure that we have the proper pitch, understanding how much we have to pitch from the door to towards the lawn, how we can get water to sheet off this in giant storms. It was really important on this project because there was no step out the back door. We came up flush to the back door with stone. So we really needed to make sure everything drained away from this. Also in the background of this picture, you'll notice the machine back there with the jackhammer attachment. Here we are ripping up all the concrete in there and getting rid of it so we can get this patio to drain, and not just be an impervious surface out there. One of the other pieces of the puzzle that I kind of look at as an environmental aspect of this project here is on bigger projects, we really like to get stone delivered right to the site. We don't have to drive it as much, and it's not just a cost savings advantage to us, it's an environmental savings to us. If that stone all came to our shop, I would have to take 10, 15 trips with trucks, 2 pallets at a time, get them over to the shop, get them over to here, unload them. We're talking about fuel and machine time and gas and all these issues where we deal with one quarry directly. We can go up to the quarry, pick out all the stones I want. It's harvested there. I choose it, we pick it out, and it comes to the site. I got that skid steer there. I unload all of it, 18 pallets in one shot. All the stone I need for this project was sitting there in a matter of 2 or 3 hours. Much less fuel involved with it, much less effort, time involved. Time is money. So it's saving the client money, but it's also, in a small way, us trying to be as environmental as possible and not burning fuel day in and day out, trucking stuff to the site. So this is a direct delivery from the quarry we use. And this is that front project you can see on the side there. That is the front walk I showed you a little bit ago, and the same house strip we just looked at. We blocked the road for approximately 3 hours, unloaded this entire truck, and got it into the job site. There you go. This is that same side garden we just looked at a little bit ago. Stacked everything out in the road just to get the truck out of there as quick as possible, and then spent the better part of the morning getting all that stone palletized into the back of the yard. Also, I want you to notice you saw the smaller pieces that we were taking out of that patio, which led to a lot of joints. Here we brought in really big stones. This was a very large patio, well over 1,000 square feet of space. So we brought stones in that were 6 by 6, 5 by 6, 4 by 6, really large, oversized pieces in here. Putting in big pieces here to make less joints and just to cover more ground. Bigger the stone, less they move. Permanence. Here's us installing that clean gravel base right here. So all the concrete was taken out of this project. We dumped it. There's a quarry near us that recycles it. Asphalt and concrete kind of get ground up and reused, get put back into concrete and asphalt products that they send out. So all of it went to the quarry, got recycled there. And here we are bringing clean gravel. The 3/4 inch clean is already in. And here we are putting the 1/2 inch clean on top. This is the base which we actually start setting our stones into. Here's the beginning of us setting patio right here. You'll notice there that piece in the corner is probably a 4x4. That large piece in the middle of this patio, this picture here, is probably a 6x4. The smallest piece of stone we used in this patio is the small one you see in that picture, and it's probably a 1x2. That's the smallest stone we'll use. Typically, on most patios we work on, we're not using anything smaller than an 18x18 or a 1x2 there. That's the smallest size stone we'll ever put into a patio. Again, it's because I don't want things to move. I want this patio to be in and be permanent and never have to be dealt with ever again. You start using those small stones, they inevitably are going to start moving around and walking around on you. Here's us a little bit farther along with the patio. You'll notice the pattern. This is that same pattern we use in the front, and it's called random dimensional. Dimensional refers to the fact that they're all squares and rectangles, 1x2, 2x2, 3x3, 3x4, 4x4. But the pattern is very random. There's no sequence to it. There's no repeating patterns in there. This is just strictly a random go at it of different sizes. All the pieces were nominal sizes of 1 foot. So all the smallest joints in here are 1 foot joints in here, but very random in the overall setting of it. Formal, but random. I mentioned about some trench drain. I mentioned you got some rain gardens before. There was one small section of this patio that was kind of flat where there was no pitch in it. It was between the garage and the building itself. So we needed to put trench drains in there, these metal trench drains that then take the water out of this flat area and direct it out to one of the rain gardens that we installed on this property. There you're looking at kind of the finished product there. And if you kind of go back to those slides I showed you before, when I showed you that small little sitting area that had that border around it, here we used that same idea of an 18-inch border wrapping this entire patio right here. Some of those border pieces, and then you'll see it better in the next slide. Those border pieces you're looking at there are 18 inches wide by approximately 10, 11, and 12 feet long right there. Again, bigger pieces, never gonna move, especially on the edge of the patio. We always like to use bigger pieces out there, so nothing ever really moves around. One of the other things I also want to talk to you about is the type of stone we use there. It's called natural cleft, and that means that the stone, that's the way it popped out of the mountain and broke out of the quarry right there. So really what we end up with is natural textures on the top. Some are rough, some are smooth, but there's texture to it. It's not smooth. And also the variation in color. Typically people call us and say, we want a bluestone patio. And I tell them, we don't do bluestone patios. We're gonna put a flagstone patio in there in your backyard where there's gonna be a range of colors. It's gonna be a mosaic of colors and patterns out there that's much more appealing to the eye than just that blue, blue, blue that most people see out there. Here's the finished product. Obviously, we dressed this up later on this year. We went back and kind of cleaned up the edges. And part of this year's phase of this project is all the planting we're going to do around this patio. Also, the installation. We created the rain garden during this patio install last year. And then this summer, we're going to go in and actually plant the rain garden and get all the plants involved with this. So, like I said, a lot of our projects, they don't all happen at once. They're not getting done all in one time. We took the master plan for this project and broke it into many little pieces. And over the past 3 years, we've been installing small sections of this, small and large sections of this garden right here. And there's still more to go with this property. So that's all I have for you. Thank you guys very much for your time. I'm about to hand it off here to Lauren Johnson, our maintenance manager, and she's going to run you through, how we deal with our gardens and how we deal with our landscape installs. Once they're installed, many of our clients then have us come back and deal with the maintenance portion of their gardens. So thank you very much.
Hey everybody, my name is Lauren Johnson. I'm the maintenance manager at Indigenous Ingenuities. And so with the design and the installation process complete, next comes the maintenance aspect of the garden. So the benefits of a garden that's densely planted, like the one we're showing you. Michael, if you could advance to the next slide. Can you hit advance?
Is that,
Oh, there you go. Okay. So the benefits of a garden that's been densely planted with a combination of plugs, such as this property, is that while there's a certain degree of upkeep to keep the invasive weeds out and encouraging the new plant material to thrive, less time is needed to maintain the garden because the plant density creates an environment that's harder for weeds to take hold. Much of what I'll be speaking about is how creating habitat gardens becomes self-sustaining and actually reduces the amount of time needed for maintenance. So for a newly established garden comprised of young plants, how does one begin to identify what should or should not be there? Gardening with native plants evokes both a conversation and curiosity. Connecting with the evolution of the plants is a wonderful way to learn about them. From watching the plants, watching them seed and their crowns expand and reseed, you not only learn about the evolution of the plants, but the evolution of your garden as well. Taller plants may eventually shade out shorter plants, and voids may become opportunities. While in conventional gardening, plants tend to be kept spaced away from others, density in habitat gardens is encouraged. Over time, this benefits the developing habitat as well as the home gardener. Putting in the time in the beginning means less maintenance and time in the future, and plants become the bed and dramatically reduces the need for mulch. Next slide. A garden brimming with diversity in turn encourages a variety of pollinators and birds and butterflies and other beneficial insects that thrive from the blooms to the leaves to the stalks to the stems and seeds, from the fruits and the berries. The wildlife a native habitat entices plays a big part in the maintenance plan by helping plants thrive and succeed. As part of our maintenance practices to further encourage a healthy habitat, we use materials that aren't harmful to the environment, such as organic fertilizers, horticultural vinegar, and organic corn gluten, which acts as a natural weed suppressant and also feeds the garden beds. We also use battery-powered tools that run emission-free, which are quieter for the person using them and also kinder to the environment, less disruptive of plants and animals and insects. Another way one can reduce their maintenance needs is to consider turning an area of lawn into habitat and reducing mowing maintenance. So the next slide will show you no-mow grass. The next, there we go. Which folds over into lush sweeping mats. And you can see somebody in the background there enjoying the coolness on her paws. So here's an example of no-mow grass that folds over, and once established, these mats help shade out and discourage weed seeds from germinating. It also doesn't require mowing, as the name implies, feels wonderful underfoot on a hot summer's day. Here's another example of the benefits of aesthetic dimensionality of turning lawn into a thriving garden bed. So instead of mowing every week in the summer, the bed goes to seed and then it gets cut back or mulch mode in early springtime. So the old plant material becomes the mulch that feeds, it gives nutrition to the plants for next season. So next slide. I think there's a delay in the slide. Michael, could you advance the slide one more time?
just did, is it, we're on Opperman there?
What's that?
Is this the one you want, Opperman?
That one, yeah. So this borough property, it's situated street side. And one way to help utilize underused space is to add plants in the vacant strips beside the sidewalk and the road. Next slide. These areas we affectionately refer to as hell strips. Though, as you can see in this example, the term no longer applies, how lush and welcoming this part of the streetscape is. Next slide. So these health strips now provide a lush corridor for passerbys to experience, a nature walk that's right in the city. It's a habitat garden for both insects, animals, and neighbors. Taller plants are planted on the outer edges and shorter plant material on the inner edges to keep the path unobstructed. And so this image right here is actually it's a similar part of the streetscape that was turned into a rain garden. So this helps utilize and slow down rainwater runoff from the city. And the next slide, the maintenance of these areas is simple. We take a mulching mower and we run over the plants or dice it back using articulating shears in the early springtime. And as you kind of dice down this plant material, you can rake it back into the beds and it becomes that, again, that natural mulch for the plants for the coming season. One of the benefits is that it adds nutrition and it helps with the plants reseeding, and it also allows overwintering insects to still remain safe until it's warm enough. So people get to enjoy feeling immersed in nature on their walk through town. You can see somebody walking through, and as you can imagine, what a change from just areas of lawn when you get to walk through plants. It becomes sort of like a botanical garden in your city. So the next slide shows the beds after a few seasons. And you can notice the density and the texture and the layers of color, and all of which remain and change as the seasons progress. And the next slide shows that the plants have filled in and are self-sustaining. And what's left to do is to watch them evolve just as they are meant to. So that's, again, the front of that garden property. And you can see all the wonderful fall colors, and the landscape just changes throughout the seasons, and it becomes ready for the end of the year. This is a garden that lasts through the seasons and changes and gives seasonal interest, summer, fall, winter, and spring. And you can see it here in the late fall. Colors are becoming more muted, but still absolutely beautiful. And that's all, and that's all there is to it.
So Lauren, we have a lot of questions.
Great.
Mike, if you want to, we'll go back up to the beginning, because as we were going along, people had questions. I wanted to hold them to the end. But let's start where you ended. Somebody had there was a couple of questions about the hail strips and dealing with salt, winter salting splash. What plants are you choosing that are salt tolerant, or how do you address salt spray into that strip from the maintenance guys going by?
Sure. I mean, you want to choose, just really tough plants. A lot of the plants that we use are plants like mountain mint and monarda and rudbeckia, echinacea. We use creeping strawberry, plants that are just tough.
Broom sedge and little blue stems.
Yeah.
A lot of the warm season grasses are extremely tough and extremely durable. All can take salt tolerance right there. It's also a compaction issue. A lot of those health strips are truly compacted areas. So we're talking about plants that have deep rooted systems that are going to start opening up that ground and loosening up that soil. We use baptisia and mountain mint a lot in those areas as well too.
So Mike, that's also another question is, what do you do if it's heavily compacted? Are you rototilling? Are you cutting off the grass? What are you doing to prepare that?
I know Lauren touched on this a little bit. We try to do as little soil disturbance as possible. I would much rather let the plants do the loosening up of the soil than us mechanically doing it. Rototilling just really creates what they call a hard pan. So you're rototilling the top 6 inches of the ground, but really what you're making is the bottom underneath that even more compacted over time. So it really, in our mind, when we install plants, we also use augers and drills. So we're loosening the soil with augers to install our plants out there. But I really, unless it's been a construction roadway and it is a real serious compaction issue, I would much rather just let the plants deal with it itself. Let the plants that are going to thrive there and open up the soil, their roots are going to get in and open up that soil. We do as little minimal excavation as possible. Most of those gardens you see, our method for dealing with it is spray it with vinegar 3 or 4 times, cover it with mulch, and plant into it. And that's it. Very simple. We're not digging. We're not scraping soil off. We're not scraping lawn off. We're not digging up the top 6 inches of good topsoil and removing it. We're leaving it all there and just starting over.
So another question was about the horticultural vinegar, and I put a comment in about the difference between strength in regular and horticultural vinegar, but do you want to speak a little bit about how you're managing chemical-free by using vinegar?
Sure. So horticultural vinegar, it's 20% acidity, so it's much stronger than your regular household vinegar. So the trick to using it is to use it on a nice, hot, sunny day. We actually, if it's very tough weeds, we'll add salt flour to it, and also gives it a little bit more of a boost. We also add orange oil, which is coats the leaves a bit more to really give it additional bang for its buck.
The orange oil is a surfactant that makes the vinegar stick to the leaves a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's amazing. Like on a sunny day, spray leaves with the vinegar, and you'll see it just wilt before your eyes. It does the trick.
So there is another question about how do you go about removing the invasive bushes? You're talking about the boxwood or whatever the evergreens were. And second question, do you recommend removal of non-native trees, things like Norway maple, as well as non-native shrubs?
Absolutely. Get rid of all your invasives, rip them out, get them out, do whatever you need to. Norway maples, barberry, butterfly bush, euonymus, you name it, get rid of it. There's no place for any of those plants in any of our gardens, ever.
So somebody asks, did you have resistance from either the town or neighbors after installing native or less formal gardens? If you're in a subdivision where most of the gardens are traditional and you do that kind of hardscaping or landscaping with such a different field, how does that go down?
We've had good feedback. I would venture to guess, obviously I don't see it all, but I have very rarely heard of us getting negative feedback when we're installing gardens out there. I can't tell you the amount of people that walk by when we're in the borough of Doylestown working, where people are walking every day. We get nothing but compliments about what we're doing and what we're seeing out there, and the fact that we're installing plants and getting rid of lawn. I have very, very rarely seen people have a negative thought of what we're doing out there. Some people might think it's messy, typical landscapers and some formal old gardeners from way back when might look at it as a little messy, but I don't pay no mind to that.
And
I think they're great.
It's different too, it's not your traditional landscape where you have the boxwoods and the flowering shrubs and the ornamental grasses, and people see that and they're like, oh, it's different, that's very unique, and there's the added benefit that it's great for the environment. There's studies about the emotional well-being and the impact of surrounding yourself in nature, and I think people really see that in our designs. It's these lush full gardens full of plants. It's not just little meatballs of plants here and there, so it's really encompassing.
Great.
So I had one direct message to me, so if I can just put that out there. I know Hazel can see the rest, but the question was, you guys were talking about putting in native vines to kind of cover some of that white picket fencing. But as far as maintenance goes, especially wood fences, they need to be cleaned, they need to be repainted, sometimes they need to be replaced. And how do you guys kind of deal with that when you've now got it covered with those native vines?
We would just cut those plants back for a year. Typically we're going to let them stay on the fence and keep growing for a couple of years. But if that fence ultimately needs to be painted and dealt with in the fall or early spring, we'll go in and cut everything way far back. those vines, most of those vines are tough as nails. We can cut those things right to the ground, get them all off the fence, stain it, paint it, do whatever needs to be done, and just let the vines retake back over. I mean, there's no reason that any one of those vines, whether it be honeysuckle, native wisteria, clematis, I can't think of all the other ones, but every one of those plants we could just butcher to the ground with shears, and they're gonna jump right back. So it's just a timing thing. We would either cut it down late, mid-fall, late fall, or go in there April, May and just cut everything back at one point, do what we need to do maintenance-wise, and then move on and let the plants fill back in.
Right.
I also want to touch on a little bit about what Lauren was just saying there. We've had clients come to us and just say they don't know. I've had clients come to us and not know plants, don't know anything about gardening, don't know anything about plants, but they've seen the gardens that we've installed in town and said, I want that. I don't know what it is. I don't know what plants are there. I don't care what plants are there, but I know what you do looks way different than what everybody else is doing. And I've had a handful of clients in town that were that people. They don't care. They don't even want to, they could care less what the plants are. They just know that what we're installing is a different vibe, whether it's a lot of people come to us because we're planting native plants, because we're an environmental organization. And I get that and I appreciate that. But we also get clients that just see that we're doing something that's a little different than everybody else, and they want it. They get it, they see it, they know it's textural and pretty, and they want that. And it's not about native plants, it's not about restoring the earth. They just see something different, and that's what they're looking for.
Right. So we have another question, Mike, from Julie, who manages a pollinator garden at her church. Do you have any suggestions for materials to use to delineate the paths through the garden? At present, all is just covered with mulch.
Mulch or wood chips is a great option. I mean, really, you could just go through there with a weed whacker too, and go and make new paths throughout that. I would treat that the same way as a meadow and tell clients that you can make a different path every year, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a mulch or a wood chip path. It could just be you're weed whacking or mowing a different section through that garden. And I think that gives you opportunities to kind of change it each year and not be stagnant, not have the path in the same exact spot every year. But yeah, I mean, if the pathway is getting encroached, vinegar is a great option, or just weed whacking. If it's all native pollinator stuff, I would really just go in with a weed whacker and just knock things down where they're getting in the way, just to open the pathway up.
Great. So someone has a question going back to your piece about the stone. How does the overall cost of large stone compare to smaller stone? I guess for the same area.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. There's not that big of a difference. Yes, once I get above 4 foot, there is an extra cost. It's an oversized cost. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot of money. Yes, for 4, 5, and 6 foot stones, I pay a little bit more for square footage. But when you're talking about a patio the size that we just showed you there, it's really not that big of a deal. So yes, it is slightly more expensive, but in the long run, it's more permanent. It's going to last forever. Every one of those stones is going to be there for your lifetime, your children's lifetime, and even more.
Right. So we have a couple of questions I'll sort of combine, and they're about mulching the plants. Do you do that fall or spring? And when do you do the cutback? They know to, leave them to not disturb the winter habitat, but when do you cut the old leaves and stalks back?
This cutting back the herbaceous plants, we do that in the springtime, and so we'll use like articulating shears to kind of dice the stems down so they're in small bits, and then we sort of rake them neatly into the beds to kind of form that natural mulch. And any areas that remain bare, we'll touch up the edges with leaf mulch. So it's a wonderful way to reduce bringing materials onto the site. You're using what's there. It's super efficient, and leaf mulch is just wonderful. I can't say enough about it. It breaks down so well. It feeds the beds, and it's a wonderful resource.
Great. So somebody has a question about poison ivy. I know poison ivy is native, but how do you deal with it when it shows up in landscapes?
I'll take that question. I leave it. It's the best plant out there. It's the best bird food out there, and it is the best fall color out there ever, ever, ever. If it's on your walkway, if it's by your front door, sure, pull it out, spray with vinegar, deal with it. But if it is just in your landscape, one of the best native plant combinations is a piece of poison ivy growing up a red cedar in the fall.
Yeah.
It is, to me, one of the most magical, wonderful things in the entire world. And when poison ivy, if poison ivy gets off the ground, it fruits. That fruit that poison ivy makes is one of the most high potent fruits for migrating birds in the fall time. There's almost nothing better than fruit from poison ivy for migrating birds. So if you love birds, you should love poison ivy. I get it. I'm allergic to it. I get it. I get it every year. It's just the fact of life. It's out there and it gets you. If you're highly allergic to it, sure, get rid of it, deal with it. But if it just happens to be in your landscape, if it's not a spot you need to walk every day, if it's not a spot that you need to touch or go into, leave it be. It is a fantastic native plant.
And the flowers too are great for pollinators.
Unreal, yes.
So we have a quick question. You mentioned an amendment into the vinegar, and somebody asked, what is salt flour?
Yeah, sure. So it's just a really fine powdery salt. So it dissolves a lot quicker. We use, we'll put it in like a backpack sprayer. And so it's a great way to, it dissolves quickly and it makes it a little bit more potent. It's vinegar, horticultural vinegar is potent as it is, but the salt gives it like a little extra.
Product. So here was the question that in our neighborhood, I knew you would get asked. How do you work with deer pressure on plantings?
It all depends on where we are. We work on projects where we don't see deer at all. A lot, like the project we just showed you a lot, that's in downtown Doylestown in the borough. There's no deer there. We're not dealing with any deer issues there. I also deal on farms and properties in Solebury and Hunterdon County, just like you guys. The deer are thick. There's no such thing as a deer-proof plant anymore. We do a lot of spraying. Lauren can touch on the maintenance issues. A lot of our gardens, part of our maintenance is deer spray. I know Lauren probably has clients that every 2 weeks we're going out there with deer spray and applying deer spray to the entire garden bed to keep the deer away. We have clients that put in deer fences. We have clients that hunt properties. There are a multitude of ways to deal with it. I get it. It is one of the toughest problems right now that we deal with. And until we as a society deal with the deer, whether it be culling, hunting, fencing, there is no right answer to that question, but in my mind, something has to be done. The deer, there should be deer. There should not be 30 to 40 deer per square mile where we are. And I know
and in some parts of Morris County, we're up to like 90 to 100 deer per square mile. So
I know, and it's horrible. And to me, that's a wildlife management situation.
Right.
There's nothing I cannot guarantee you the deer are not going to eat your garden. I saw deer eat American hollies this year. Carl saw deer eat daffodils. So nothing's safe anymore. There is nothing that is safe. So go for it.
Oh, just consider plants in the mint family. They tend to steer away from minty, really pungent smelling plants. So your narca and your mountain mint and lavender are all in the mint family, and they tend to steer away from
ornamental grasses, panicum, broom sedge, little blue stem.
Great. So the questions are coming thick and fast. I hope you can stick around for a few more minutes. Do you have tricks for mosquito control? Doug Ptolemy said mosquitoes will be attracted to buckets of water with hay that's soaked for a few days. Then mosquito dunk kills the larvae. Do you have experience with this? How close do I need to put buckets to reduce mosquitoes? I'm trying to keep my husband from spraying.
Don't spray.
I haven't really worked so much with dealing with mosquitoes like that. I mean, I'm more familiar with plants that deter mosquitoes, things like lemongrass and scented geranium, lavender again. But as far as other methods, I don't have too much experience in. What about you, Michael?
I don't really either. It's nothing I get it. They're out there. They're a bug that's in our environment, but.
So we have a quick question. Somebody says, we're more than an hour from you. How far do you go?
We go that far. I would tell people we work from New York to Baltimore and DC just about. we will travel for the right jobs, for the right things. We travel. Obviously, we just did a bunch of work for you guys up at the Great Swamp last year. Yeah, we absolutely work. Most of our work, I would say, is Bucks County, Hunterdon County, but we're working on the outskirts of Philly. I have a couple jobs in Philadelphia. I'm looking at projects in Princeton. I'm looking at projects in North Jersey. We will travel for projects, so that is not a concern.
Great. So thoughts on planting in bunches or random assortments of plants? Is it just aesthetics or do you prefer one over the other?
It depends on the situation. The more bunchy, keeping clusters thicker, fuller of certain things is a little bit more formal. But we also can get a little wild and just randomly place things. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I planted plugs by standing in the yard and throwing them, literally throwing them into the garden. Wherever they land, that's where we're planting them. And some people think I'm crazy when I do that, but if you want to get random and you want it to look natural and like it's been there for a while, you can't plant in straight lines and little rows. And everything you've ever read about distance and spacing on plant tags, I think is the biggest load of BS out there. I plant plants 2 inches apart. I plant plants 20 feet apart. There is no right or wrong answer to that question. You can pack things in, you can keep things loose. I think what you see, I mean, sure, spacing of trees, you're not going to plant a tree, right next to each other. But I will say that too. I plant shrubs, small trees and shrubs under big trees. There is no one space. If you look at a site map on our plan, there might be 5, 6 plants. There might be a tree, a small tree, a shrub, and 6 different perennials, all in a couple square feet area of place. So there is no right answer to that question. It all depends.
A follow-up question. Do you have any experience with the concept of green mulching using shade-loving plants in between late summer tall perennials?
That is kind of exactly what we do. A lot of what you looked at in those hell strip pictures and a lot of the pictures Lauren showed you is exactly that. It's called green mulch, meaning there is no mulch. Somebody asked that mulch question before to Lauren about how often do we mulch. Ultimately, we want to get a job to the point where we never have to mulch them whatsoever. Lauren talked about running that mulching mower and weed whacking and taking shears into those gardens. Ideally, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you should never, ever, ever have to add mulch anymore. The plants are so thick in there. You're putting all that dead material from the plants back on the ground right there. There should come a point where there is no additional mulch needed. Your plants are your mulch, green mulch.
Right. And then totally different question. I have a redbud seedling tree that's growing in the wrong place. Is it too late to replant it now?
Not if you're going to water it.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know, Sandra, did I miss any? I think I got all the questions.
Nope, that's everything that I saw.
So if anybody has any last questions, you could unmute yourself. Otherwise, I think we need to let, it's been like rapid fire here for Mike and Lauren. If anybody has any final questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you could just ask them directly.
I just saw the thank you very much. And I also want to extend our gratitude to you guys as well. Thank you so much for having us as part of your lecture series here. It's been an absolute pleasure and we love speaking to people.
So if anybody is interested in reaching out directly, we put at the very beginning of the chat, we put the website for Indigenous Ingenuities, but I'm going to just put it in right now and hopefully I don't mess it up. It's pretty simple, right? It's in the chat right now. And if you want to see their work on a larger scale, you're welcome to take a walk at the conservation management area where 10 vernal pools, 1,500 feet of stream bank, and
over 1,500 feet of stream bank restoration, and more than that, countless vernal pools created.
Yeah, you can see their work in action. But we will obviously people have a lot of questions, so it looks like this is a deep vein to tap. People want to garden with the environment in mind, and so we really appreciate you giving us your time to give us your insights. Really super helpful.
You are most welcome. We are happy to do it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, people. we will follow up with the recording in a couple of days.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. That was great.